Faraway Paladin is my next light novel and I'll be reviewing all the volumes. For those who've never read the Faraway Paladin, I'll say this. If you're a fan of light novels and isekais, there's a very big chance that you'll like this series, so give it a shot starting off with the very first volume. The fantasy element is well constructed, especially if you're a fan of RPGs. The characters feel real and have chemistry, and they're not just the usual caricatures you sometimes see in isekais. I really like the villain of this book, and although he is not too present, he is heavily foreshadowed and very impactful when he finally appears. And this has an interesting theological and mystical element that you don't see too often in this level of detail in anime or manga, so it's definitely worth a shot just for that. And in case you're wondering, The Boy in the City of the Dead works perfectly fine as a standalone book. It doesn't require any prior knowledge and it doesn't have any cash-grabbing cliffhangers. It works as a good read by itself. So if you've never read The Faraway Paladin, be sure to go read it, start off with the first volume and then come back to this video. As a disclaimer, I did watch season 1 of the anime and loved it, which prompted me to buy the books. This is my first reading of the light novels, so now let's get started with Volume 1, The Boy in the City of the Dead. Unlike ReZero, for example, the Faraway Paladin are hardcover books, which means that besides being more effective as a blunt weapon, they're also generally speaking more expensive on the stores. They do come with the added benefit though of having these cool foldable pages with character designs and a nice art piece. Speaking of art though, I'm not a mega fan of this cover. Visually speaking, it looks impactful, it immediately draws in your attention, but upon further reflection, besides William and Mary, the rest of the characters are very drawn out and barely perceptible. This cover contains William, Mary, blood. If you really squint your eyes, you can kind of see Gus here. This dark thing is supposed to be stagnate and up top is Gracefield. But the strong shades of red and orange make it very hard to see any of this unless you're really looking for it. If I was designing this cover, I would have put a lot more emphasis on the family. Not only are they the main characters of this first volume, but in the story it's likely the last time that they will be together, so putting them on a poorly contrasted corner of the cover feels a bit strange. For the art itself, while William definitely looks cool, I don't think he looks appropriate for the type of story and book that this is. He looks way too menacing. I criticize sometimes series like ReZero, for example, for having an art style that is too cutesy for the story. Here, I think it's the exact opposite criticism. If you don't know anything about the Faraway Paladin and you see this cover with this title on a bookstore, you likely think that this is about some sort of revenge story, as William's very serious and mean-mugging face indicates so. There are some art pieces that I really enjoy throughout the book, like this one for example, but generally speaking the art style is very rough, and that may be a bit in theme for the first volume, as we are in the City of the Dead, so it fits the spooky aura, but in terms of content of the story, I think this art style is way too rough for the story that it portrays. I wanted something a bit edgier than what we got in the anime, but this swings way too far in the other direction. Now, even though I'm not a huge fan of the visual presentation, I really enjoyed this book, with the main reason being its characters, starting off with William. William isn't perfect, but he's a hard worker, he's dedicated, he's polite, he's intelligent, he's a character that one can take inspiration from, and I like that. Not every character nowadays needs to be a morally grey, dark subversion of the genre. Sometimes it's good to go back to basics, and William is a very archetypal heroic character. He's a good guy with a perhaps overly harsh view of himself that loves his family and tries his best to become the better version of himself that he can be, and I can get behind that. There's so many anime nowadays where the main characters are either completely degenerate or just a cookie-cutter, bland self-inserts with no real personality that William feels strangely refreshing, even though I know his character isn't revolutionary. And William can also be a bit naughty at times, for example gambling with Blood and Gus, even though he knows it's wrong. He's not perfect, he's not a paragon of morality, he's just a normal dude trying his best but won't let his overly strict morality get in the way of some fun here and there. His more mischievous side is also shown in the scene where he lies and pretends to be sick, and I really like this scene because it shows both sides of the character. His more naughty side, where he lies because the curiosity got the better of him, so he knows he can get away with a bit of trickery, and his heroic side, when he immediately jumps into Mary to save her from the flames, even if he burns his arms in the process. It's through these moments that William proves to himself and the readers how much of a changed man he is in this new life. Going back to the beginning of the book, the author does a great job at depicting how William lived in apathy and despair in his previous life. And this is a great point. It makes the isekai element relatable to the reader. William didn't do any irredeemable crime, any unforgivable offense, he simply wasted his life away, which is something increasingly relatable in the age of cheap entertainment. William wasn't hit by a truck. His backstory feels incredibly common and deeply personal at the same time. In these isekai stories, there's always this element of the characters discovering the world through a cultural lens that is supposed to be similar to the reader. But to me, that isn't very compelling by itself, and it gets old very fast. I like isekai when the main character is striving for redemption, striving to be better now than he was in his previous life. To me, that's the true beauty of isekai, not just a fantasy element. I'm one of those people that thinks there's a lot of isekai out there that could just be fantasy series and the isekai element doesn't really add much. And for Faraway Paladin, I would say the reincarnation aspect is the main driver of the first book. Without William's more regretful and mature voice acting as the narrator, the story wouldn't be nowhere near as interesting. Yes, in the climax there is a big fight against a god, quite an explosive way to start off a series. However, to me, the main juice of this book is still the human element. A person humbled by the chance to start again, a couple that can finally end their years of stagnation and fulfill their dreams of having a child, a man that is torn between his friendship and his loyalty to his duty, and the grandson that he is now growing to love. This book hits all the right narrative notes for me, and I think the biased view we get from William being a reincarnated person is a core component of that. I don't think this would work as well if it was just a regular fantasy series. William wouldn't try as hard and the relationships wouldn't be as meaningful from a naive perspective of a 15-year-old. They're as strong as they are now because William is trying so hard to not repeat the mistakes of his previous life. If we ignore the gods and the mindless undead, this book technically only has 4 characters and it never feels empty or lacking in content because the characters are just so damn good and have such good chemistry. I love the way that Gus, Blood and Mary have very distinctive personalities but still feel like a cohesive family. Gus in particular is very rude, but we know that deep down he cares. He could have disposed of William many times, he could have ignored him, he could have hated him, but perhaps influenced by Mary and Blood's love for him or his own secret wish of having a student, he really grows to like William. And I like how intelligent and eccentric Gus is. Usually these powerful wizard types are very enamored with their own magic and their own power, and Gus has no such delusions. He fights a very pragmatic, small spells used effectively style, which I find super fascinating. And we see that he is very magically talented, even being able to do quadruple casting, which seems like an impossible feat, and yet what does he value most? Is it his spells? Nope, it's money. Gus is a very interesting character and very funny. I like the contrast between him being so wise and also so full of vices like gambling and a very profound love for money. Blood, from his fighting style to his teachings, is much more straightforward, but he doesn't teach only fighting skills, he also teaches good values and is a good parent to William, for example in the hunting scene telling William to not let animals suffer. Blood is a true warrior not only in his skills but in his heart. If Gus represents knowledge, then Blood represents strength, and I love how he explains everything using physicality and has very simple solutions to every problem. Might is right, and he says that you can solve almost all your problems by having enough muscles and using enough force, which, in a fantasy world like this, I kinda can't argue with that. Blood doesn't have the delicate finesse that Mary, for example, has, but he still plays the role of the parent perfectly. For example, when William is sick and bedridden, Blood sees that he's not going to be much useful by his bedside, and so immediately runs out to get some game so that he can recover faster. Blood is a very cool character, even though he does it in his own brutish way. There's more to him than meets the eye, and it's very easy to see how Mary would fall for him. And speaking of Mary, she's great. It's a shame that Mary is only here for one book, because to me she's a great fictional mom, one of the best I've seen in these light novels. The grace, the care, the love, the instinct of self-sacrifice, she's a great character and fills every scene with her charm. She's a great counterbalance to the other two buffoons' energy, and it's very easy to see how William might have grown up with a few screws loose if it wasn't for Mary grounding him and teaching him good values. If Gus teaches the knowledge and Blood teaches the physicality, then Mary teaches everything else required to be a good adult. There's a clear admiration that William has for Mary throughout the whole book, helping her with simple chores and in her religious customs, which are things that shouldn't be super exciting, especially for a reincarnated person, but he does them anyway as it shows his love for her. Mary is tremendous, and I'm very happy that in this particular isekai the parents are very relevant, as sometimes in isekais they're just not really a factor, they're either useless or not too relevant to the story. And I'm very sad that Mary and Blood are gone at the end of Volume 1, but I know that if they stayed behind, it would have cheapened the ending. One of the most unique aspects of the Faraway Paladin is the religious element. I can't think off the top of my head of any main character that is as pious as William. The religious element is not very common in anime or manga, and even rarer that it is presented as a good thing. The evil priest stereotype is a very real thing in anime and manga, and for example in JRPGs, there's this very common theme of the hero battling demons and monsters and slowly growing into fighting angels and gods in the last boss. I like the presentation of this polytheistic world, and I like that gods have actual agency in this world, which is so fascinating. Gods standing for different values and William comparing this to the ways that society rise and fall, but also at the same time them offering different blessings, is such a cool mechanic and such a great way of doing exposition. And what I love the most about the religious element in the Faraway Paladin is that not only is it part of the lore, but also it complements and strengthens the overall theme of the first book. This theme of stagnation versus living properly. The oath mechanic is incredible for this very reason. The stronger and more ambitious your oath is, the more challenging your life will be, but the more rewarding it will be. Even his loving parents encourage Will to make a simple oath and live a simple life, but William, through circumstances or the story and through his own volition, wants to be better, wants to live a life worth living, and he chooses a very ambitious oath. I dedicate my whole life to you. As your blade I will drive away evil, and as your hands I will bring salvation to those in sorrow. This I swear on the flame of Gracefield, goddess of flux. Compare this oath to Gus, who just promised to do what he wanted. It's kind of smart in his own way, and fits the character. Gracefield, the goddess of reincarnation, acts as a trigger to the story by reincarnating William and letting him keep his memory so that he can do better with this new chance. She acts as his motivation and is the source of William's fate, and not only did Gracefield save William, but she also helped William save his parents, which is so important for him. Gracefield represents the cycle of life, but more importantly, in the theme of the story, she represents redemption, the chance to start again and do better. And of course, Stagnate is the perfect villain for this first book, as he is the lore and thematic counter to both William and Gracefield. To Stagnate, he wants no loss, only stagnation, where nothing lives but nothing perishes. The undead can regenerate, they never tire, they are eternal, but they cannot learn new skills, they cannot go beyond what they were in life. Stagnate represents this coddled, apathetic world that is devoid of risk and bravery. He represents the previous inconsequential, boring life that William lived. And this is why I love The Boy in the City of the Dead so much. Everything feels connected, from the story to the themes to the lore to the characters. And from Stagnate's perspective, he's the hero. He's just doing what he thinks is right. He's eliminating pain. But William knows that life is not a meaningful life. In order to have a good life, you require sacrifice and bravery. The battle between Stagnate and William was incredible, a great climax to the narrative of this book, and has multiple callbacks to things that happen throughout the book. For example, even William's burned hands come into play. And to top it off, it has the core clashing of ideologies that make up this book, of stagnation versus redemption. From a narrative perspective, I will say that starting off your fantasy series by fighting off a god is very hard to top in the following books, but I enjoyed it anyway. The farewell between Blood, Mary and William was very wholesome, and I loved that the author gave an extra chapter to Blood and Mary. It wasn't needed, but it's a very nice touch, seeing as we won't be seeing these characters again, and because this book is so main character centric, we didn't really get to see them interact much as a couple. Overall, The Boy in the City of the Dead is a fantastic read. From what I remember, the anime suffered a bit from clunkiness and a lack of production value, so to me, reading the book was definitely worth it. As I said, I'm not thrilled by the art style, but the book is a fantastic read anyway. The story and characters more than make up for it. So I'll see you guys in volume 2, and ciao!